Thabo adjusted the helmet on his head, its built-in light casting a dim glow on the rough, dark walls of the coal mine. The air was thick, heavy with dust, and the hum of machinery echoing through the underground tunnel. He glanced at the watch strapped tightly on his wrist. 3:15 a.m. Another hour before his shift ended, and his body already ached from the back-breaking labor.
Thabo, you all right?
Cabello's voice carried over the clinking of tools and machinery. His closest friend and co-worker leaned against a pickaxe, his forehead glistening with sweat. Thabo nodded, forcing a small smile.
Just tired. It's been a long week.
Tell me about it.
Cabello replied, chuckling.
When's the last time you took a proper rest?
Thabo shrugged, his lean frame slumping slightly under the weight of his gear.
Rest doesn't pay bills.
The words came out sharper than he intended, but Cabello only gave him a knowing look. Everyone at the mine knew Thabo's story, how he had taken in Naledi, pregnant and abandoned, and supported her through it all. Some called him foolish, others admired his kindness, but none of them understood the weight he carried.
Rest won't kill you, Thabo,
Cabello said, patting his shoulder before returning to his task. Thabo let the words hang in the stale air, picking up his tools again. He wasn't working this hard for himself. His dreams were simple. A future with Naledi and little Tlotlo, the baby he had grown to love like his own. He had even started saving for Lobola. It wasn't easy, but love was worth it. At least, that's what he told himself. The morning light had just begun to creep over the horizon when Thabo reached home. Thabo trudged into the small but cozy house, his shoulders sagging from the weight of a 12-hour graveyard shift at the coal mine. His overalls were dusted with charcoal streaks, and his boots left faint smudges on the tiled floor. The dim light in the living room flickered, but it was enough to see Naledi curled on the couch, baby Tlotlo sleeping soundly in her arms.
"You're back early,"
she said, her voice soft as she glanced up at him with a warm smile.
Finished a bit sooner than I thought.
Thabo replied, setting his helmet and bag down by the door. The baby stirred slightly, then snuggled closer to Naledi, still lost in his dreams. Naledi shifted carefully, cradling Tlotlo as she stood.
"Let me put him in his crib,"
she whispered, heading toward the baby's room. Thabo watched her go, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. When she returned, she found Thabo peeling off his boots near the door.
"Go shower,"
she said with a small laugh.
"You smell like the mines."
Thabo grinned, his tired eyes lighting up briefly.
I'll take that as a compliment.
As the water cascaded over his aching body, washing away the grime of the mines, Thabo allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The thought of Naledi and Tlotlo waiting for him gave him a sense of purpose that no amount of coal dust could dull. When he stepped out of the bathroom, freshly showered and wrapped in a towel, Naledi was leaning against the bedroom doorway, her arms crossed lightly. She was dressed in a simple, fitted nightgown that highlighted her soft curves.
"You've been working too hard,"
she said softly, her eyes meeting his.
You've been worrying too much.
Thabo replied, stepping closer to her. She reached out, running her fingers along his freshly shaved jaw.
"I can't help it. You're always taking care of us. Let me take care of you tonight."
Thabo's hand found her waist, pulling her gently toward him.
You already do,
he murmured. Their lips met, slow and deliberate, as the weight of the day melted away, their connection unspoken, but undeniable. For those few stolen moments, the outside world ceased to exist. When Naledi slipped out of bed, the first rays of dawn were creeping through the curtains. Thabo lay back, his chest rising and falling steadily as sleep finally claimed him. She pulled on her robe and made her way to the kitchen. The aroma of frying eggs and sizzling bacon soon filled the house. Thabo stirred, awakened by the enticing smell. He shuffled into the kitchen, his smile sleepy but content.
"Breakfast ready,"
Naledi said, setting a plate on the small table. Thabo kissed her temple.
You spoil me, Naledi.
Her laughter was soft, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, one that Thabo didn't notice. The soft hum of a fan filled the small kitchen, holding a giggling Tlotlo above his head. The baby's laughter rang out, and Thabo couldn't help but grin despite the ache still lingering in his arms from the coal mine. Naledi, standing near the door, smiled faintly at the sight.
I'm heading to the market.
She said, slipping on her sandals.
We're out of fruit and some other essentials.
Take your time.
Thabo replied, lowering Tlotlo into his lap.
We'll hold down the fort, won't we, little man?
Naledi smiled and nodded, grabbing her purse. She hesitated for a moment, watching Thabo tickle Tlotlo's tiny feet before stepping out into the warm afternoon sun. The market was bustling, as always. Naledi maneuvered through the crowd, her mind already sorting through the items on her mental list. She paused at a stall selling ripe mangoes, running her fingers over the smooth skin of the fruit.
Naledi?
The voice stopped her mid-motion. She froze, astonished. Turning slowly, she found herself face to face with Lorato. He stood just a few steps away, his sharp features instantly recognizable even after all this time. His clean-shaven face and pressed white shirt gave him an air of effortless composure, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty.
Lorato,
She said, her voice barely above the noise of the market.
It's been a while.
He replied, stepping closer. His eyes searched hers, then drifted to the basket in her hands, as though searching for the right words. Naledi's grip on the basket tightened.
what are you doing here?
I was passing through.
He said quickly, his tone casual but his body language tense. He hesitated, then added,
I heard about the baby.
Her heart sank. She steadied herself, her face hardening.
What about him?
Lorato took a step closer, lowering his voice.
I want to see him. I want to be part of his life.
Naledi's jaw clenched. The noise of the market seemed to grow louder around them.
You mean the son you said wasn't yours? The son you abandoned me with?
His confident facade cracked slightly.
I made a mistake, Naledi. I didn't know what to do back then. I was scared.
She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head.
Scared? So you ran away, left me to deal with everything alone?
I thought it was for the best.
He admitted, his voice quieter now.
But I've had time to think. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make it right. I want to be there for him.
Naledi's chest tightened. Memories of their time together flooded her mind. How they had met at a work conference, his charm, the whirlwind romance. She had fallen deeply, even knowing he was married. And when she told him she was pregnant, his sudden denial shattered her.
You can't just walk back into my life,
She said firmly.
into his life. It's not that simple.
I'm not trying to complicate things.
Lorato said, his voice soft but steady.
I just want to be part of his life. He's my son, Naledi.
She stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, pain, and something she couldn't name. Finally, she glanced at her watch.
I need to go.
Naledi,
He called after her as she turned away.
please think about it.
She didn't stop. The market's chatter swallowed his voice as she walked briskly back toward home. When Naledi returned, Thabo was sitting on the couch, Tlotlo fast asleep on his chest. He looked up as she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face.
You're back just in time. Someone wore himself out.
Naledi set the groceries down on the kitchen counter, forcing a smile.
Looks like it.
Thabo watched her for a moment, sensing something off.
You okay?
I'm fine.
She said quickly, turning away to unpack the groceries. But her hands trembled slightly as she placed the mangoes on the counter, her mind still replaying the encounter at the market. Naledi absent-mindedly folding one of Tlotlo's small blankets. The house was quiet, save for the soft murmur of the television in the living room, where Thabo and Tlotlo were watching cartoons. Her phone buzzed beside her, and she glanced at the screen. Another message from Lorato. We need to talk. I can't stop thinking about you and Tlotlo. Naledi's chest tightened as she placed the phone face down on the bed. This was the fourth message he had sent since their encounter at the market, each more insistent than the last. Her resolve to ignore him was wearing thin, and a part of her hated herself for it. Thabo's laughter rang out from the living room, pulling her out of her thoughts. She stood and made her way to the door, leaning against the frame as she watched him playfully toss Tlotlo in the air. The baby squealed in delight, his chubby hands reaching for Thabo's face.
Hey,
Thabo said when he noticed her, his smile as warm as ever.
we're thinking about starting a father-son wrestling league. What do you think?
Naledi forced a laugh, the weight of Lorado's messages lingering in her mind.
Sounds like a good plan. Just don't teach him any bad moves.
Thabo grinned.
No promises.
She returned to the bedroom, her smile fading as soon as she was out of sight. Picking up her phone, she opened Lorado's message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. After a moment of hesitation, she typed a response. I can't do this, Lorado. Please stop messaging me. She hit send and set the phone down, but it buzzed almost immediately. I'm not giving up, Naledi. I'll prove that I can be there for you and Tlotlo. Let's meet. Her heart raced as she stared at the message. She knew she should delete it, but her fingers betrayed her. Before she realized it, she had typed, tomorrow, the cafe near the market at noon. The next day, Naledi showed up at the cafe. She sat at a corner table in the small cafe, nervously stirring her tea. She had arrived early, hoping to compose herself before Lorado showed up. When he walked in, her breath hitched. He looked as polished as ever in a navy blue blazer and slacks, his confident stride drawing a few glances from other patrons.
Naledi,
He said warmly.
You're late.
She replied curtly, avoiding his gaze.
traffic.
He said with a shrug, flashing the same disarming smile that had once made her fall for him.
I'm glad you agreed to meet me.
This doesn't mean anything.
She said quickly.
I'm only here because I want to make things clear.
Lorado leaned forward, his voice softening.
Naledi, I've made mistakes. I know that. But I want to make it up to you. To Tlotlo.
She scoffed, shaking her head.
You can't undo the past, Lerato. You left me when I needed you most.
I know, he said, guilt flashing in his eyes.
But I'm here now. I can provide for you. For him. I've already found a place where the two of you can live. A fresh start, Naledi. No more struggling.
Naledi's heart pounded as his words sank in. A place? She repeated.
Yes.
Lorado said, his confidence returning.
A nice apartment. You don't have to depend on anyone anymore. You and Tlotlo can have the life you deserve.
Naledi stared at him, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of doubt, guilt, and temptation. She thought of Thabo, of everything he had done for her and Tlotlo, and yet Lorado's offer lingered in her mind, pulling at a part of her she wished she could ignore. When she returned home, Thabo was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He greeted her with his usual smile, but it faltered when he saw the look on her face.
Naledi,
He said cautiously.
is everything okay?
She hesitated, forcing herself to meet his eyes.
Yes, everything's fine.
Thabo studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
She said, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. Naledi had been unusually quiet since her meeting at the cafe. Her once warm laughter had been replaced with long silences. Tonight, however, was different. She had asked to speak to him after Tlotlo was asleep, her tone leaving a knot in Thabo's stomach. Now, as she stood across from him in the dimly lit living room, he felt the air grow heavier.
Thabo,
She began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her,
there's something I need to tell you.
his tall frame casting a shadow across the room.
I'm listening.
I met with Lerato.
Thabo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue.
He wants to be part of Tlotlo's life.
She said, her voice trembling.
And he's offered us a place to stay, a fresh start.
Thabo stood still for a moment, his silence louder than any words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, but there was a crack in it.
He abandoned you, Naledi. He left you to fend for yourself. And now, you're considering leaving with him? And not to mention he's married.
It's not about me.
Naledi replied quickly, her voice wavering.
It's about Tlotlo. He deserves to know his father. And I know you've been nothing but good to us, but
Thabo shook his head.
And what about everything I've done? Haven't I been a father to him? Haven't I done everything for the both of you?
You have.
She said, her voice breaking.
You've been amazing, Thabo, but Lerato is his father.
Thabo visibly distraught and devastated, his breathing ragged.
And what am I, Naledi? What am I to you?
Her silence spoke volumes. A few days later, Naledi packed the last of her belongings into boxes. Lerato had arranged for a moving truck to take her and Tlotlo to the new apartment. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt hollow. Thabo stood in the doorway, watching as she zipped the last bag.
You're making a mistake,
He said quietly, his voice filled with both anger and sorrow. Naledi paused, her hand gripping the bag tightly.
Maybe I am.
She said, barely above a whisper.
And I am really sorry, Thabo.
Thabo's jaw tightened. As the truck pulled away, he stood on the porch, staring after it until the taillights disappeared. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on his chest, and as he turned back into the empty house, the silence was deafening. He sat on the couch, running his hands over his face, struggling to hold back tears. He had given everything to Naledi and Tlotlo, and now it felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. Naledi's new apartment was spacious and modern, but it felt cold and lifeless. Lerato provided everything she needed, ensuring the bills were paid and the fridge was stocked. But his presence was fleeting. Days turned into weeks, and his sporadic visits became more of an annoyance than a comfort. Each time he left, the emptiness of the apartment seemed to grow. At night, she lay awake in the dim light of the bedroom, her mind replaying memories of Thabo's laughter and the warmth of his embrace. She missed the way he played with Tlotlo, the way he made her feel safe and valued. Now, as she sat alone while Tlotlo slept, the glossy surface of her new life felt paper-thin. Late one evening, after another one of Lerato's brief appearances, Naledi stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, tears slipping down her cheeks. Months passed. Thabo, though still heartbroken, threw himself into his work. Each shift at the coal mine was a way to distract himself, a way to rebuild the pieces of his life that had shattered. Friends encouraged him to move on, but he found it hard to let go of the dreams he had built with Naledi. Slowly, he began finding moments of peace, small joys in his routine, even if the scars remained. One afternoon, while walking through the bustling shopping mall, Thabo spotted Naledi. She stood with Tlotlo near a toy vendor, the child's laughter ringing out as he pointed at a colorful ball. For a moment, Thabo froze, his heart catching in his chest. She looked different, tired, her once radiant face marked with regret. Naledi's eyes met Thabo's from across the crowd. Her face softened, and guilt clouded her features. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words didn't come. Thabo nodded politely, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, and then turned and walked away, his posture firm and resolute. As he disappeared into the crowd, Naledi stood there, clutching Tlotlo's hand. The ache in her chest grew, knowing she had lost something she could never get back. Love is not just about sacrifice, but about mutual respect and value. Cherish those who stand by you in your darkest moments. Sometimes, the best way to love yourself is to let go of those who take your love for granted.